Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this June 1st, 2016 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can listen to my show every evening from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's on FirstAmendmentRadio.com Pacific Time, or they play the show at 11 a.m. Pacific Time. Or if you can't catch those shows, go to my website at arcticon.com, and you can get shows going back over a decade talking about what I call the Vatican-led New World Order, and that's no joke, folks. The tentacles go out all over the place. And my guest today is attorney Jon Levy. John's licensed in both the United States and England, and he's not your typical attorney. He's not your typical personal injury attorney. He's not your typical attorney chasing ambulances. I guess, I have a law degree, and I guess if I was an attorney and decided to go that way, I'd want to take on cases like John has done, because very few attorneys do it. And sometimes I wonder how he does it. And he's going to tell us. But I got to know John years and years ago. He's been on my show many, many times regarding a case called Alperin v. Vatican Bank. And that was a case that brought, wow, what a case. Talked about so many different things: the genocide in Croatia after World War II, the Vatican connection to laundering money from that, actual involvement in that genocide, bringing money into the Vatican Bank, and then John taking on the case of the victims, the family members of the victims, trying to get reparations in a civil lawsuit regarding the connection to the Vatican. And John, before we go, people forget easily, and this is a 10-year case that now is in the EU. We talked about it last time you were on, but why don't we just refresh people's memory? Because I'll tell you what, it's one of the most interesting cases I ever saw against the Vatican in the United States. And the reason I first had you on is because I wanted to show people that what I talk about when I say the Vatican is involved in governmental affairs, has a lot of control over our lives, and I wanted to show some practical things in how they do it. And also, I wanted to talk about, I used to say the Vatican's involved in all these wars. And this case showed me that. So kind of refresh our memory and tell us where it stands right now.
Yeah, well, thanks, Greg. This case originally arose with the U.S. government that came out with a report in 1998 that the Vatican had laundered a large amount of Nazi loot coming from former Yugoslavia through the Vatican Bank after the Second War. And about a year after that, we took on some of the victims of that from Yugoslavia, people whose family had verified claims of property that had been looted by these mainly Croatian forces that were allied with Nazi Germany. And we thought it would be settled pretty quickly as, a simple economic looting sort of Holocaust case. Although most of the victims were Orthodox Christians, there were some Jews and Roma, Gypsies, and others who were victims, but mainly Orthodox Christians because they'd been subject to their own genocide.
This genocide gets lost in the Holocaust. Everybody thinks just of the Jews in Germany, but tell us how many people lost their lives in this.
Well, somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million Orthodox Christian Serbs were slaughtered during the Second War with the complicity of the Catholic Church. The idea was to do some ethnic cleansing there in Croatia and Slovenia and Bosnia and parts of Serbia. Either convert or use the sword and fire, as they used to say in the Crusades. Convert them or give them the sword and fire. And that's what they did with the participation of a lot of Catholic priests and monks, I might add, some of whom, a lot of them, Franciscans mainly, took off the robes and put on black uniforms. So the Vatican, of course, had an interest in covering that one up. And the money from all the looting, when you liquidate 500,000 to 1 million people, there's a lot of, gold and other property that's been taken away. And the proceeds of that went into the Vatican Bank, according to the U.S. government, after the Second War. So we sued federal court to find out what happened. And as things sometimes do happen in federal court, we sued the Croatians and the Franciscans and the Vatican
Now, this was in the Ninth Circuit in San Francisco, right?
Well, yeah, it eventually ended up in the Ninth Circuit in San Francisco. It went back and forth between there and the district court, and there were some writs to the U.S. Supreme Court. Kept the Vatican's defense attorneys busy for about 12 years until they finally, bumped us out of there altogether and said, "Oh, gee, guess we don't have jurisdiction, guys. Go try somewhere else."
Why do you think it took them 12 years to figure that out?
Well, I think there was a lot of back and forth with the State Department. We know the Vatican sent a couple diplomatic notes, actually through the State Department files that were leaked a couple years back, right?
Mm-hmm.
By the guy that went to prison there. You remember the name, Greg?
Oh,
in that the first huge leak that went out on WikiLeaks.
Oh yeah, I can't think of it now.
Yeah, he changed his name to Chelsea, if I remember. Had a sex change operation in prison there. But it was part of that bunch of stuff, and we found in there, diplomatic notes from the Vatican frantically asking the U.S. government to intervene in that case. So there certainly may have been some intervention by the State Department trying to reverse course. But the upshot of it is when you take on not only the Vatican, but as it turned out, the CIA, who was behind the laundering of the money as well, that had been a pet project of James Angleton, their former director of counterintelligence. You run into some pretty heavy resistance, and that's what I think happened. So they found a way to delay us, hinder us, and eventually get the case out of there without making any sort of finding.
Right, and during your discovery process, you had some solid depositions from former CIA people that the Vatican was actually involved in all the things you mentioned earlier, right?
Absolutely. We found really the only witness still alive, which was a U.S. Special Agent, William Gowan, and he's still alive today. I talk to him on a regular basis. He's a friend of mine now, and he testified for 4 days in a deposition against withering cross-examination by the Vatican in the Franciscan Order, because he was the man that blew the whistle on this. A lot of this Croatian Ustasha treasure, as it was called, back when he investigated it in 1947 for the U.S. Counterintelligence Corps, which is a precursor of the CIA.
Right.
And he to this day, he believes he's been blackballed and hindered by the CIA because he stumbled across one of their operations to use this money. This very money that went to the Vatican Bank was used for the Nazi rat lines, which still is having reverberations today. The movement of Nazis to the Near East and Spain and South and Central America to work on behalf of the CIA. We're still seeing fallout from that, and he became persona non grata. And the only thing that saved him from being bumped off was that his father was a very high-ranking State Department official who went on to be the U.S. State Department's minister to Switzerland.
Otherwise, you think they would have got to him, huh?
But yes, he said they tried to get him a couple times, and then they set him up for a investigation by the House Un-American Activities Committee. The man got the full treatment. And however, we've discovered that, in fact, Jim Angleton, again, head of the CIA counterintelligence unit, was tasked especially with blackening Gowan's reputation. So nonetheless, he acquitted himself fine, and there was proof positive testimony that a treasure convoy came down there from northern Italy, parked there at St. Peter's, in the nice square in front of the Vatican, and unloaded, first making a stop there on Via Tomacelli at the Croatian confraternity or church there of San Girolamo. So, he was a witness. He had debriefed the people involved in it. So we have the proof. The problem was we were thrown out of the U.S. court, so we took it to the EU.
Now, before you get to the EU, tell me what I was shocked when I heard this. They knocked it out on jurisdictional basis, stating the Vatican Bank doesn't do business here. How crazy is that?
Right. Well, that's the point. Well, it is crazy because we had receipts for gold the Vatican has. In fact, probably some of this very same gold that the Vatican has on deposit at the Federal Reserve. And the courts came back and said, well, you can't prove that that's the same gold. You can't prove it's the same gold. We said, look, gold is interchangeable. Gold is gold. The Vatican gold reserves are at the Federal Reserve. Well, you can't prove that they did business. Say, look, here we have proof that the Franciscan, I forget the name of the place, but they had a big operation in Chicago doing pro-Croatian activities, and the one of the chief money launderers, his name was Mandic, went from the Vatican over there to Croatia. We said, look, the guy moved there. He took the money with him. We set up this, kind of operation, pumping out anti-Yugoslav propaganda through the 50s and 60s and 70s. And again, the courts just blew us off. They didn't want to deal with it, essentially. And you know how that is. Federal judges are appointed for life.
Exactly.
You can appeal it to more federal judges, which is what we did. And of course, you just get the same result. So if they don't want to do it, they're not going to do it.
Yeah, and so as I said, as a friend of mine once, Sherman Skolnick, who used to be a investigator in Chicago before he passed away, he said the most endangered species in this country is an honest judge. And
that's right. In fact, Sherman Skolnick was one of the early proponents of this case.
No kidding.
Passed on not too long after we filed it.
Wow, that's great. I used to talk to him all the time before he passed away. He's from my hometown, Chicago. And you know something, just as an aside, I guess people shouldn't be too shocked. It was kind of refreshing to hear Donald Trump call out that judge even as in his civil case. And people just got shocked over that. But why not? A lot of these judges are in the pocket of special interest groups, correct?
Well, look, it's worse than that, Greg, and I hope Trump will do something about it. We have a constitution that was written in 1789. In 1789, people's life expectancy was not 100 years because, federal judges get the best medical insurance in the world. We can't touch it with a 10-foot pole, but those guys live a long time. And it's not unusual for federal judges to sit on the bench into their 90s. No one can tell them to retire. They're appointed for life. And in 1789, people weren't expected to live that long. So you didn't want to keep having to reappoint judges who were probably dying off like flies anyway. So you appoint them for life. But fast forward, 250 years out here, it's getting close to, and it's totally inappropriate. Why would you appoint these people for life? Once they're in there as federal judges, they're not accountable to anyone. And the worst of the lot, Greg, is the U.S. Supreme Court. You realize their docket is only 80 cases a year? 80
No,
cases.
I didn't realize that. Yeah.
They dismiss 8,000 cases that people send up there, and they hear only 80 cases a year, yet they have a huge budget. Now they used to hear more. What, things have gotten less complicated, or are those judges just lazy? Clarence Thomas apparently hasn't spoken in public, but for a couple times during court hearings. I mean,
yeah, he doesn't like to talk in public.
I know some of your readers probably think he's a great guy, but I mean, again.
What's that, John? We lost John. Go ahead.
You lost me?
No, you're okay. Go ahead now.
I'm okay. Yeah. Do they earn their keep? I don't think so. Not the U.S. Supreme Court judges. So I hope Trump does more calling out of these federal judges.
Okay. So then the case gets thrown out in here in the States. You didn't quit then. Where'd you go then?
Well, we took it over to the European Union Commission because the one treaty, the Vatican, as you know, usually doesn't sign treaties unless it's to their benefit because they don't like to be under the control of anybody. And that's the first thing you learn, I guess, at the Vatican is the Pope is supreme, and the Pope surely is not going to agree that some other international organization can tell him what to do, because the Vatican, of course, is a theocracy. The Pope is the ultimate dictator there, and it's the way it's set up. But they did sign an agreement with the European Union to let them use the euro, because they make a ton of money off the euro. As you know, when you go to the Vatican, you go to the gift shop, one of the hot-selling items there is the Vatican euro coin, which they sell, by the way, for a lot more than a euro.
So they're making money
out
of it.
That's a pretty good trick. If you can print a euro and sell it for 3 times face value, you're doing pretty good. And it's never going to get spent because people take those home as souvenirs.
That'd be like me coming up to you and go, "Here's $1, John. Give me back 4, will you?"
Right. So in order to print those euros and mint euro coins, they had to agree to the anti-money laundering provisions of the European Union, if you can imagine that.
Mm.
And you would think, what? Vatican? Then they must have had to clean things up. Well, no. Here's what we found out, and this is quite interesting. When we lodged the money laundering complaint, because essentially if you're dealing in looted gold, it's money laundering, right?
Mm-hmm.
Complaint with the European Commission. It went to the European Central Bank, then over to the Commission, and back and forth. And they finally came back, and when we kept pushing them, and they got some negative publicity, they came back and said, okay, we've investigated this, and the Vatican assures us they buy their gold for their coins from commercial sources. So first of all, we assure you there's no blood money in Vatican gold euros. I said, okay, but that's not the main issue here. What about the money laundering? And they said, well, sorry, our agreement is with Vatican City, not with the Holy See. And you see, the Vatican Bank, even though it sits in Vatican City, is really part of the Holy See, which is different from Vatican City. And we said, what?
Well, yeah.
Wait a minute. And I dug through my paperwork, and I had a affidavit from the attorney for the whole Vatican, Franzo Grande Stevens, who's also the attorney for Fiat, or used to be, and for the Agnelli families. If you know anything about Italy, they're quite powerful.
Yes, they are.
Franzo Grande Stevens there, he says, the Vatican Bank is under the law of the Holy See and the Vatican City. We showed that to the European Commission, and you know what they said?
What?
They said, well, that's interesting. You should take that to the Vatican's Financial Intelligence Unit for clarification.
Oh, yeah. You're going to get a good clarification there, right?
Well, we didn't. In fact, we've been chasing them for several years, trying to get them to answer correspondence, which they refuse. That's Andre Brulhart, who's supposedly their cleaner over there, but he's just a front man. And so about a year and a half ago, we filed a canon law petition with the Pope, and we know they got it. We sent it and had it personally served, on the Archdiocese of New York and all sorts of places, and no response.
So that's where that sits now.
That is, and apparently the Pope, because of it, because the Vatican Bank is the malefactor, you can take it for hierarchical intervention. There is what it's called. You don't have to be even Catholic to file a canon law petition, as it turns out, under canon law. And so it was all in proper order, but the Vatican, no surprise here, doesn't want to follow its own laws.
One last thing on this case before we move on is, the Vatican, going back to Angleton and when the CIA got together with Pope Pius XII to launder money back then in the drug trade, which came to be known as Operation Gladio, which still is on today. The Vatican has a long history of money laundering in many different areas. Now, the Pope recently said he's cleaning house there. What's your thoughts on that? If he's cleaning house, really, has he done that, or is that just lip service to the 1 billion strong?
Well, I take it to mean literally he's cleaning things up, meaning they want to do what they've always been doing, just do it cleaner and more efficiently. I guess his main concern, Greg, was that some of that money or a lot of the money wasn't going to where the Vatican wanted it to go. They're going to continue laundering money there. It was just so inefficient that a lot of the cardinals were pocketing the money. So, I think we want to clean it up and make it a more efficient tool for laundering money.
It's kind of like getting a new instead of using the old 1950s laundromat, let's get a new Maytag in there, right?
That's right, because they had a lot of leakage. I mean, money was being stolen right and left, and even if criminals don't like that either, which is what they are, and they're trying to make it more efficient. If the Pope was going to clean things up, first thing he'd do is close the Vatican Bank, but he's not about to do that. So
no. Well, we got about 5 minutes on this side of the break, but anyway, let's get to a case. This one's interesting. Just came to my mind. Philip Kronzer. We got to know each other through Philip Kronzer as well, and he took on the Vatican, basically money scandals over Medjugorje, the Mother Mary apparition story. And boy, he went through the ringer. Where's he at now? Just give us a little background in 5 minutes here on that case.
He's kind of vanished. I mean, there was an arrest warrant. I mean, the man, Philip Kronzer, had a foundation. He's a devout Catholic. He took on the Catholic Church over this Yugoslavian stuff, which had to do with the Franciscan order again and fake apparitions coming out of Bosnia called Medjugorje. And he spent millions of dollars on this. He unmasked a lot of fraud. And unfortunately, he used the court system in the U.S. to do it. And the people, they struck back at him, got a judgment. They actually threw him in jail for contempt of court a couple times.
I know you were trying to help him, right? You were his attorney for a while, right?
I was his attorney the whole time. He fled the country to the Bahamas, and they brought him back in chains. But let him go. They let him go. Figured that he'd been ruined enough, but he bounced back, went after them a little bit, and then he vanished. Phil Kronzer was able to prove a lot of things involving the Vatican. I think the thing that ultimately either made him disappear or he was vanished or whatever was this Medjugorje commission started by Pope Benedict. I think Kronzer actually had a strong hand in convincing former Pope Benedict, who's still alive, by the way, hiding out there at the Vatican doing God knows what. But he convinced Benedict that Medjugorje was a fraud. Benedict did then order a Medjugorje commission, whose results were supposed to be out years ago, and they've never produced their final finding, which had been rumored to show that the entire shrine of Medjugorje was a money laundering fraud by the Franciscan order to support the very same Croatian fascists who had the hand in laundering money out of Yugoslavia in the Second World War.
Yeah, and this all started when he used to go to these. He was a devout Catholic, and then they kidnapped his wife, so to speak, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was a cult, literally a cult, where the idea was to shake down these wealthy Catholic pilgrims and promise them miracles, except, there were no apparitions and there was no Virgin Mary there.
Exactly, and then he
investigated it, but
never did anything.
Has never released its findings.
So you think he's still alive now?
I believe he's still alive, but he has been either has gone quiet or has been silenced. We're not sure which.
Well, if you ever hear from him, tell him I'd like to talk to him again. Well, I used to communicate with him. I remember when we were doing stories, I used to have to communicate with him and never know where he was, and he'd always call me from some undisclosed location. They were really after him. He thought he was going to lose his life.
Well, I told you, when they brought him back from the Bahamas, they locked him in a notorious prison there in the Bahamas called Fox Hill for about a week. And we weren't sure he was going to survive that. He was already in his 70s. And then they popped him out, brought him back in chains, and cut him loose at the airport without $1 to his name. And he clawed his way back. But then he disappeared.
And this was a multi-millionaire, straight-shooting businessman from the San Francisco area, right?
That's right. So wherever he is, we wish him well. But I think truly the fact that Pope Benedict was removed from office really had a lot to do with Mr. Kronzer disappearing, because he had been working with people in Benedict's administration to try to clean up Medjugorje. And of course, Benedict himself, as you know, was blackmailed out of office. He certainly didn't retire for health reasons, as they claim.
Interesting. Yeah, I was talking to a couple insiders I know in Rome, and they say he's somewhere in the Vatican over there. They're hiding him out somewhere in Vatican City, and that's the last they don't know what he's doing there. But anyway, we're going to come back. I got about only 20 seconds here, John. I want to get into this case that you're working on in between Taiwan and China. And I always find your cases interesting because you go right to heart of the problem, and that's their pocketbook. And this one's quite interesting, and I want you to explain it to me. It's complicated, and I'm a simple guy, so explain it simply next half hour so we can understand, because it's really an interesting case involving China and Taiwan and a lot of money that's missing, and you're trying to get it back to the rightful owners. Okay, we'll be back in 3 minutes with Jon Levy on the Investigative Journal.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Okay, we're back for the second half hour of the Investigative Journal. You can catch my show every evening, 6 p.m. to 7 p.m., FirstAmendmentRadio.com, and a number of AM stations across the South. Jon Levy's my guest, Attorney Jon Levy, licensed here in the States and in England, international attorney, does a lot of interesting cases, a couple we talked about in the first half hour. John, this is a new one. You sent me some information on this. It's a case regarding money problems between Taiwan and China. I'm going to let you explain it to me because it's a complicated case. Make it simple for me, will you? Go ahead.
I'd be glad to. Yeah,
Go ahead.
It's a new one, but it's an old one.
Okay.
And those are the best kind of cases because they have a lot of history. We've all heard about sovereign debt. Countries borrow money.
Mm-hmm.
Some countries borrow a lot of money. The U.S. borrows a lot of money. But what happens when these countries stop paying on their debt? They go into what's called default. And that can happen, to very large countries, especially when there's changes of government. And one of the largest borrowers of money in the first half of the 20th century was China. China borrowed billions of dollars. And they were able to do that because they had gold reserves, and they backed all this these bonds. They paid a lot of interest, by the way, 6, 7, 8% bonds that were good for 50 years. And Chinese bonds, they were traded on all the exchanges, and because they were backed by gold. What happened was in 1949, when Chiang Kai-shek got kicked out of mainland China, the first thing he did was grab the gold reserves and he took them to Taiwan. But they then declared default. Said, "Oh, can't pay these bonds anymore until we get back into China. Sorry, guys." And they declared one of the largest sovereign defaults that ever occurred on 50 years worth of bonds. And that, of course, that happened it's over 50 years ago now. But
so China was a big debtor nation 50 years ago, right?
Well, it's more like, 60 going on 70 years. Yeah. I mean, they were one of the biggest borrowers because they had to fight the Japanese. They had to build infrastructure, they all sorts of things. But they had the reserves and they had the economy to do it. So 1949, they never paid another penny. The bonds didn't go away. In fact, these bonds are still traded on the New York Stock Exchange. Euronext Paris Exchange still lists about 11 of these bonds. So they still exist, and that's not unusual for sovereign debt to stick around for hundreds of years. The British, until recently, were still paying on bonds from the Napoleonic Wars. Believe that? And they were paying on bonds from the 17th century, something regarding the South Sea bubble that they had insured. I mean, so these things go on for hundreds of years. The Haitians were paying the French reparation bonds for 100 years. So, I mean, it's not unusual. So these bonds, yes, they're old, but they're not the oldest ones that have ever gone into default. And what happened was, just because you declare a default, the obligation on the bonds didn't go away. The People's Republic of China, because we have two Chinas. You've got Taiwan, which is officially called the Republic of China, and it claims the mainland. And you have the mainland, which is the China we know, which is called the People's Republic of China, which claims Taiwan.
Okay.
And then you have Taiwan, which is occupied by the Republic of China because it only became part of China in 1945, so the people there don't really have anything to do with these bonds. The People's Republic says those aren't our bonds. The Republic of China that's over in Taiwan issued them, and that's their problem. The Republic of China says, yes, there are bonds, but we can't do anything with these bonds until the problems with the mainland are settled, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which could happen tomorrow or might happen 50 years from now or never. So
who are you working for in this case, just to make it simple?
I'm working for the bondholders who are holding, billions of dollars in defaulted bonds.
And who are these, Taiwanese citizens or what?
No, they're usually, the bondholders are for the most part Americans and Europeans.
Oh, really?
These bonds were marketed to people who had money.
Oh, okay.
And, they're denominated in pounds and francs and rubles and what have you. And they were marketed through the largest banks of the time, through Barings Bank, through Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation, through J.P. Morgan.
How much money are we talking about here? What are you looking at?
Well, we're looking at billions and billions of dollars of debt. I mean, because at this point, because they were backed by gold, and the price of gold in 1949 was a lot less than it is now. So these were gold dollar bonds or gold pound bonds. So you have a gold factor, and then they were at high interest rates relatively at today's rates, 7% bonds, and you accrue all that interest. I mean, it's billions and billions. So they'd have to be settled. I mean, you couldn't settle them for the true value.
And I guess these countries would just like it to go away, right?
Well, yeah, the Chinese would like it to go away, but the law of Taiwan, or Republic of China, says they have to deal with it one day. And our position is, well, you just had a change in government in Taiwan. The Kuomintang government is out. That's the Chinese nationalists who issued the bonds. You have a new government in there that's not affiliated with the Chinese nationalists, that's sympathetic to the people of Taiwan. And our proposal to them is that they should take this huge amount of money that the Chinese Nationalist Party called the Kuomintang has stolen from China. Remember I told you that, the gold.
Mm-hmm.
why don't actually not take all the gold out of there? So they did that. They took the gold out, but instead of depositing the gold with the Republic of China, they took the gold and used it for their own purposes. Gave it to their cronies and the like. So we're asking the new government there to go, hey, let's get that money back from the Kuomintang party. Let's do an accounting, because we know there's at least 500 million of it sitting in bank accounts. Let's start there. Grab that 500 million and let's pay off the bondholders. Let's make them an offer, and let's take care of the victims.
And you have a list of these bondholders, right?
Yes, we represent a number of them, and we're in touch with bondholder groups. We're also in touch with people who were persecuted by the Chinese Nationalist Party under a time called the White Terror over there, where anyone who was opposed to Chiang Kai-shek was murdered or imprisoned. So we're saying, let's make good. We don't have this Chinese Nationalist Party in power anymore. And the benefit for the Republic of China or Taiwan is, in case you do settle your problems with the mainland, the people of Taiwan won't have to pay these bonds off. They make the people who stole the gold, which was the Kuomintang, pay it off. So that's where we stand today. It's really kind of just a very simple case of unjust enrichment. And we're actually very cautiously optimistic, because the new president of Taiwan, she just made a speech yesterday saying that, yes, we are going to look into the abuses of the Kuomintang now that they're out of power.
And, okay, so all these bonds were issued. You want to get the money back for the bond, and you're talking about Americans involved here too?
Americans, a lot of Americans, French, and other Europeans are still holding these bonds.
All right, so now China is seems to be in a pretty good financial situation. You'd think
Taiwan is, but again, we're not asking the People's Republic pay it or Taiwan. We're saying the Kuomintang, which was the political party of Chiang Kai-shek, has billions of dollars that still sitting around from the gold reserves they stole. Make them pay for it. Make the people that stole the gold reserves that guaranteed these bonds pay for it.
And where do you think the gold is right now?
Well, we know that the gold, a lot of it was sitting over at the Chase Manhattan Bank and may still be there.
You're kidding.
No, some of the gold is with the Taiwanese branch of Bank
Isn't
of
that
China.
In the Trump Tower? Or is that the China?
Could be, and some of it was with Bank of China, which is now known as Mega Bank. And a lot of it was parceled out to people who we know. And a lot of it is still sitting under the name of the Kuomintang party in Taiwan in bank accounts.
Now, okay, so that money's sitting there, millions, maybe even in Trump Tower there.
Right.
And this party's out of, are any of these people in this party in jail or being prosecuted for anything?
Not yet, but I think that's going to happen, because traditionally in Taiwanese politics, when you come out of power, the opposing party will go after you. And that happened to my client, Chen Shui-bian, who was the first non-Kuomintang president of Taiwan. And he lasted for a while. And then when he lost an election, they went after him and locked him up.
So you could, in a sense, you could say this new party in Taiwan could go after these people hiding the loot then, right? Say,
well,
return it.
They will. They've said as much, that they're going to seek, they're saying the right code words, Greg, reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
And justice for the victims of the Kuomintang, which to me says, well, how are you going to get justice? You give people money. That's how you generally do it.
You know, getting involved in these cases, you also have a lot of flack. When I'm talking about flack, I mean, you learn a lot about the civil rights in these countries. What goes on in Taiwan now? Is it pretty ruthless still to talk up against governments and things like that? What's the civil rights situation?
They had a democratic election, but again, yes, it is not democracy in the sense that we're used to. Well, maybe it is these days. So,
yeah.
The thing I would worry about is the Kuomintang is maybe beaten, but it's not gone. And as you know, the Kuomintang is not just a political party. They're running drugs, and we're still running drugs in the Golden Triangle. And they had their hands in a lot of stuff, and still do. And they have a reach over into mainland China as well as still in the U.S. through the Chinese triads.
And how close does mainland China work with this new party in Taiwan now?
Well, this might tell you that the new guys are pretty good, because the mainland does not like them.
Oh,
they much preferred working with their so-called enemy, the Kuomintang.
I see.
Which tells you that they probably were working together.
All right. And so now it sits where? Who did you, when you do a case like this, who do you go to for justice? Where's the court
Right.
that you go to?
Right. You don't go to a U.S. court. In fact, we've tried that, and actually we won the case, and then the judge threw it out, found an excuse to get rid of it. Said, "Oh, it's too old. I'm not going to give you any money." So what we did was we took the case to the government of Taiwan, and they have 4 branches of government. Unlike the U.S., they have a 4th branch called the audit branch.
Mm-hmm.
And the audit branch said, yes, you need to take this complaint to the finance minister. But we waited, of course, until the Kuomintang was out of office, and therefore, just recently, within the last 2 weeks, we took it to the finance minister, and we're waiting the reply. But we're pretty positive based on the new president's speech yesterday.
That you can get, yeah. Oh, that'd be interesting. Keep me abreast in that. Good. Let's move on to the Ukraine. Before I get to this, you're involved in some cases there, but there's a lot of tension now behind the scenes between Russia, the United States, buildup of our military in the Balkans, Putin coming back with, if you read Russian news, there's a lot of stories that they're considering, protecting themselves against American and NATO aggression. And so there's a lot of stuff going on. The Ukraine being basically the place where the igniter of this. You're involved in cases there, but tell us what those cases are, then tell us what you think about all this Russian-American tension right now.
Right. Well, Ukraine is just a flashpoint, and we're not being told the whole story. There's a lot at stake there. The U.S. was essentially behind a coup d'etat that took out the elected government of Ukraine and put in a CIA-backed government. And that's portrayed to us as democratic change. The Ukrainian people might feel otherwise. It's also an old case of the U.S. recycling, again, these old Nazis or people that are spawn of the Nazis. Because I think even on the U.S. press, you'll see Ukrainians wearing swastikas coming out there fighting on their front with the Russian-backed groups. And, they're wearing Nazi regalia. You're going, what's that all about? Well, it is still part of the old program that our friend Bill Gowan that I was talking about in the previous half hour was involved in, where you're recycling the Nazis from the Second World War. And appealing to fascism. So the U.S. is behind all that. There's been a lot of atrocities committed that we don't hear about by these Ukrainian fascist militias. So that's my involvement, trying to bring those to international courts. But the most interesting case of all was the shoot down of the Malaysian airline flight MH17, which remains unsolved to this day, even though the press was quick to say Vladimir Putin did it. No one's been able to produce a single iota of evidence, despite the U.S. and its allies, Netherlands, taking custody of most of the evidence.
So what's your theory on that then?
Well, if again, Russian sources have a couple different theories. One is the Ukrainians shot it down by mistake, which is probably the most plausible one. Because the Ukrainians were the ones that had the Buk missiles that can take out those airplanes, not the rebels. I mean, they tried to say the rebels had captured a Buk missile battery or something, but they could never prove it. That is the most prevalent theory. And then there's a secondary theory that Ukrainian jets shot it down by mistake, thinking it was Putin's aircraft, because the livery on both those airplanes, the Malaysian airline flight and the Russian presidential jet, is red, white, and blue. They look similar. So it could have been a mistaken shoot down of what they thought was Putin's airplane, which was aloft at that time, just at a more northerly location.
Mm-hmm. So right now the status there is what in the Ukraine? Who's really got control of that country, or is no one?
Well, the government, Kyiv, the capital, is backed by the U.S., and the U.S. is firmly in control there. If you want to listen to John McCain, we should be basing NATO forces there. Mm-hmm. The Obama administration doesn't want to go quite that far, but they have they have a lobby that's pushing that. Joe Biden's son is on the board of directors of a company that wants to drill for oil over there, and there's a lot of family interests. So the U.S. is propping up the government. The government itself is very unpopular with the people. They'd like to get rid of it, but if you speak up against the government there, they have these thugs that'll come and beat you and haul you off.
So we put in this puppet government, and many of the people there would rather remain tied to Russia then, correct?
Well, absolutely. I mean, except for the western part of Ukraine, which borders Poland, the people speak Russian. They don't speak Ukrainian, and their pensions have been cut. Their economy's in shambles. The promises of visa-free travel from the EU has never materialized yet. They're going to give it to the Turks, but not the Ukrainians. If Ukrainians try to go into the EU as refugees, they're turned back, unlike the Muslim refugees. And it's not a good situation. Most of Ukraine's trade was with Russia. That's all been harmed. And
yeah, now, if we would have just stayed out of it, what would have been the end result? Basically, they would have dealt with Russia. The people could have had free trade there. And our concern was what? Russia was going to go back into Poland, into other countries there? What was the, or is it just our strategy of tension to create another war?
Well, now, I normally, right. I mean, Pat Buchanan, who I normally don't agree with, pointed this out, and he said Russia is not a threat to the U.S. What Russia's not going to invade the U.S. Russia's not going to invade Europe. Russia's concerned with security on its borders. That's
right.
About it. And so
that sounds strikingly similar.
Why is NATO building stuff up there, missiles and things to attack Russia when Russia is not a strategic threat to Europe or the United States?
Yeah, and that's the weird thing about it. And basically, if they just want to protect their borders, sounds strikingly similar to what we want to do,
That's right. If you have, crazy Ukrainians shooting people on your border and because they're speaking Russian, you might want to step in there. And same thing, if you have NATO suddenly putting missile batteries in Poland and the Baltics pointed at you, you might get a little bit concerned.
Yeah, be like, okay, Russia coming again to Cuba and pointing stuff at us, right?
Right. And what is Russia doing outside of Russia? The only thing Russia's doing outside of Russia I'm aware of is beating the crap out of ISIS in Syria.
Yeah, something that Obama should have been doing a long time ago.
Right, which Trump has said, let the Russians take care of ISIS. That's great. Cruz said that, but you listen to all the rest of the neocons in Washington, somehow that's a terrible event, that the Russians are taking out not only ISIS, but al-Nusra, which is al-Qaeda, and other jihadis, which of course the U.S. wants to claim as their Free Syrian Army, but which would just as soon cut your throat as take your money.
Right. So again, just to make it simple, what's your goal there? Who's your involvement with, and what are you trying to get?
Well, again, our involvement there is to try to get some justice for people who were killed by the Ukrainian forces. There was a massacre in Odessa a couple years ago. People burned alive, and then the Ukrainian government said, well, they must have set themselves on fire, right? and some justice for the victims of MH17. Get an honest investigation going there. And there's been a lot of other, summary arrests and executions throughout that country that aren't reported. And, surely if we can get rid of the Democratic neocons there, or whoever, they're Republican neocons as well, maybe we get some coherent policy. I mean, my word there would be, don't poke the bear. Why are you poking a bear? If you poke a bear, what happens, Greg?
Yeah, and it just seems like we're creating these tensions and then blaming it on the Russians, when in fact...
poke the bear and you're liable to lose a digit or an eyeball or something. That's what happens.
Exactly, yeah, it's a crazy case. So how many people are on that plane again? I forgot. There's been so many plane crashes, I forgot.
Well, MH17, there were at least several hundred. It was a terrible tragedy. And again, like the other Malaysian flight that disappeared, no results. Like the Egypt Air flight that disappeared over Egypt a couple weeks ago, no results.
Yeah, I wonder what happened to that one too. You know, the one that was over. Remember the first one, MH. What was it?
Yeah, the other MH, right? The one that disappeared. Well, they don't even know where it disappeared. En route to China from Singapore or Malaysia or something, where it just disappeared. And then we have this Ukrainian one that they know was shot down, but they can't say by who, even though the U.S. has satellite intelligence all over the place. I mean, the place was a battlefield. First of all, why route a plane through there? And of course, you knew the eyes in the sky were watching, but yet no one seems to know who shot down what. And now this Egypt air flight, it would certainly make me nervous.
And who do you go to in a case? Who do you go? What courts do you go to there? To get justice here. Who you in front of?
Well, yeah, eventually these cases are going to end up in the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, because they involve multiple litigants in multiple countries, and Europe has a system that Russia is part of, and so is Ukraine. The problem is whether that court's going to be biased and influenced by the European Union and NATO, since it's sitting over there in France. So, but ultimately, that is where it should be straightened out. The problem is the investigators are sitting on the investigation.
Wow.
There's no results except the plane was taken out by an explosion that came from outside the plane. That's the official result on MH17. Well, that doesn't tell you much.
Yeah, I got about a minute and a half. You were also doing some stuff in Africa, real quick, in a minute.
Real quick, this is one to watch, Greg. There are 60 million Christians under siege in Nigeria. There's a Muslim president, Mahmoud Buhari. He's a bad guy. He's allied with Saudi Arabia, and that is going to get ugly. There were some shootings yesterday. The southeast part used to be called Biafra, which you've heard about, and 60 million Christians in Biafra in the Niger Delta with a Muslim government surrounded by Muslims, Boko Haram, ISIS in the area. That has the potential to make the 30 Years' War look like a little,
Right, so you're talking about a slaughter of Christians in Nigeria.
60 million up against the Muslims, and if they think
and you
they
never
got
hear a word
now, look out.
You never hear a word about this in the American press. It's just amazing to me.
No, not a word. The only two major weeklies covering it is International Business Weekly and Newsweek. That's it. No one else covers that beat.
Hey, listen, we're all out of time, but I want to come back with you in a couple of weeks, and let's talk more about this. And we didn't have time to talk about what's going on in Nigeria, and then we can get to some other things you did there in the Cameroons and other stories. So thanks a lot, John, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Okay, good talking with you, Greg.
Okay, have a good day.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host, Melody Cedarstrom, right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free, 1-800-375-4188.